Alrighty, well thank you everyone for being with us today. The talk today is about grace, and the title is By the Grace of God, by the Grace of God. And for me that is almost a tongue-in-cheek title, because when I was a kid growing up, by the grace of God had kind of a context to it of, just dumb luck almost, just dumb luck, So if somebody passed a test that the entire family knew that they shouldn't have passed, they would say, "Oh, that was by the grace of God. That was by the grace of God." If they had some type of an accident and they didn't get hurt, well, that was by the grace of God. That was by the grace of God. So I can still hear my grandparents, the old people who were old when I was a kid, that when they would tell a story, when they interjected by the grace of God in their story. It had a meaning of, there's no way this could have happened on its own. There's no way it should have happened on its own. So I just wanted to share that with you, that the idea that I grew up with was that this was something that was almost a miracle. This was something that should not have been. And we want to think about the word grace. We want to think about the word grace and what it means to live by grace. What is this thing that we're talking about when we say live by grace? And as we study different teachers and different teachings, there comes up in many of them, if not all of them, this idea that you and I are living a dual existence. We have what Joel Goldsmith would say is we have the three-dimensional human experience. And of course Einstein would say the fourth dimension of time and space. But we have the human experience. That's one of the two experiences we have. And then we have the spiritual experience. We experience ourselves and the world around us as a spiritual entity. And it's as if we are stuck. It's as if we are stuck, kind of living our existence between these two worlds. We are clearly identified with and rooted in the human experience. That is our everyday normal experience. That is the experience we had as children going to school. If you want to pass the test, you gotta read the book, you gotta study hard, you gotta do. It's all about kind of doing, right? So the outcome that you get in the human experience is a result of some sort of doing. You can make it happen. You can make it happen. We see this in the attitudes toward physical fitness. No pain, no gain. You got to get out there. You got to sweat. You got to make it happen. All those kind of things. And it's true at the human level. I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm just saying that that's the orientation. That is the first place that the mind goes. You can see it on the billboards when it comes to disease. Help fight this disease. Help fight that. Help fight the other thing. See, life is a struggle, and we have to get in there, and we have to use our grit, we have to use our brawn, we have to use our willpower. We got to force things to happen. This is the human orientation towards life. And then the spiritual orientation towards life that we are told about, but perhaps experience only in glimpses, if at all, is that all of that human way of looking at things, all of that sense of struggle, all of that sense of forcing it happen, all of that sense of I'm going to make it happen, that goes away at the spiritual level. See, this is the level of it is not me, but it is the Father within me that does the works. Divine love goes before me, making the way straight. Now, at the spiritual level, it's not that there isn't activity. Sometimes people will say, well, we just can't sit around in a cave all day staring at the wall, as some of the ancient mystics did. We, got to get out and do something, But there's a difference between doing something and activity. There's a difference between that. We need to understand that. Excuse me. We can be active and we can be doing something without that sense of ego that I am doing this, I am making this happen. So in other words, it's kind of becoming a beholder, an observer of life, as life is expressing itself all about us, through us, as us, you see. We go about our daily activity, but there's a sense of connectedness, a sense of oneness, a sense of unity, even a sense of awe at just how wonderful life is, just how wonderful everything is that is unfolding about us and through us. So the spiritual teachers tell us about this. Excuse me. I'm going to get a sip of water here. The spiritual teachers tell us about this, but the human side of us hears it, nods our head toward it, but we don't quite understand it because we we haven't experienced it. We haven't experienced it. So we want to consider then that what we know about anything, what we know about life, we know by virtue of what we have experienced. I apologize for that. What it is that we have experienced. Even if we learn something by reading a book, it was the experience of reading the book, and then it was the experience of the concepts that we read in the book as they were processed by the intellect. That was the experience that we had, and then we come and we say, well, I know this. I know this thing. But what we know of it, we know only of our experience, and our experience may in fact be an incomplete experience, So we can know all about something, but never experience it, never, in spiritual terms, never realize it, never have the realization of it, never have the big aha, that's what that means, that's what that is all about. The example I use frequently is learning a skill, learning how to do something new. So for example, to fly an airplane, a certain amount of skill that's required in flying an airplane. And there's lots of things that you have to learn about flying an airplane. And you can watch videotapes, you can read books, you can take classes, you can do all kinds of things to have your intellect gain experience about flying an airplane. But not until you get in the cockpit and take off and turn and maneuver and land. Not until then do you actually put yourself in a position where you can realize it, where you can experience it. Now, even with that, the first few times out that you go out with your instructor and you're learning how to fly, you may not be experiencing as much as you could. You may not be realizing it. You may not be one with it. In other words, you may be thinking about it. You may be thinking, okay, what's my airspeed? Oh, okay, how many RPMs do I have on the motor? What's my altitude? And now I'm going to begin a turn, and where do I look on my gauges to tell what my degree of bank is, and how do I know if I'm keeping my nose up above the horizon? And you're just kind of intellectualizing. You're just kind of thinking about it. You're thinking about it. So you're not experiencing it to the fullest degree that you can. You're there. You're in the cockpit. You're doing all of the things that need to be done to fly the plane, but you're not fully experiencing it because your intellect is still totally engaged. And over time, if we keep our practice up, if we keep consistent, if we keep doing the things that we ought to be doing, then something happens. Something tends to happen. I don't know that it happens to everybody, but it can happen. And that is the oneness comes. You remember the book out in the 60s, Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The oneness comes. And all of the things that ought to be done, all of the things that need to be done. Monitoring the airspeed, knowing the airspeed, knowing the angle of the nose above the horizon, knowing the altitude, knowing all of those things. It's just there. It is just there. And at that point, it is as if the pilot and the plane are one. They are just in sync with each other. And when I was learning how to fly, of course I flew gliders, so I didn't have to worry about running out of fuel or any of those things, engines. I had a totally different set of things to be in tune with, like was the air moving up or the air moving down? Was I gaining or losing altitude and all those kind of things? So my experience in flying the sailplanes was oneness, one with the atmosphere, one with the environment, one with the hawks that would come and circle in the thermal with me. This Zen experience, the oneness experience. But when I was learning how to fly, for the first few months, I was completely stuck in my head, just completely thinking about doing this and doing that and doing the other thing. And one day the flight instructor said to me, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about," he says, "Well, don't think. Don't think. Don't get stuck in your head. Just fly the plane. Just fly the plane." And a few months after that, I was out at a field that was new. We moved a lot, and I would fly different places. And I was with my instructor, and it just clicked. Everything just clicked for me that day. No matter what he asked me to do, the plane did it, and I didn't think about it. It just did it. There was a little fence at the end of the runway, a little post fence with wires stretched across it. And I felt so comfortable in the plane that day that if somebody put a Coca-Cola can on the top of that fence post, I knew I could dust it off with the wheel as we went over it. I knew that within 6 or 8 inches, I would know where that plane was and I would know what to do. It was just absolutely an incredible, a mystical experience almost, or at least an experience of oneness and of unity. So we want to bring that back then to this idea of living in the 3 or 4 dimensional human world and living in the spiritual world. So one thing to consider is that when we're living in 2 different states like that, we used to use this analogy in change management. The organization is the way it is, but it wants to be this way, and it starts out and it has 1 foot in each canoe, and these 2 canoes are going down the stream together. So you can get the visual image of a person standing astride with 1 foot in each canoe. And they're going down the stream, and everything seems to be okay, but then there's a rock in the middle of the stream. So now the rock is wide enough that they can't spread the canoes far enough apart so that 1 canoe goes around each side. Now they have to make up their mind. Now they have to get into 1 canoe or the other. And what tends to happen to people is that when that happens, when something comes up like that, they go back into the canoe that's most familiar. They go back into the mode of operating and thinking that is most familiar to them. And for us, growing up in these bodies, living in this human world, that is what is most familiar to us. That is the one that people tend to go back to. So we become exposed to these ideas of the spiritual teachers, but we haven't necessarily experienced them. We're not entirely one with them yet. They're nice to think about. It's good to know. Maybe it'll happen someplace when we get to heaven and all those kind of things. But we're really not totally committed to it. We're not totally vested to it. And if something happens, to us, an unexpected bill or something of that nature, we immediately go back to the human the human way of thinking, which is, what do I have to do to make enough money to pay this bill? That's the ordinary human way. And then you have the spiritual way, which says, take no thought, take no worry. The Father in heaven knows that you have bills to pay. The Father in heaven knows you need money to live. But seek first the spiritual kingdom. Seek ye first the spiritual kingdom, and all of these things shall be added unto you. So what does this have to do with grace? What does all that have to do with this term of grace? So if you look up the definition of grace, it means, like any other word, it means different things to different people. And it kind of changes, it kind of changes over time. Some of the I would say the most rigid definitions might be that God does things for you, or does things to you, or both for you or to you, in spite of your own unworthiness. Right? So that's a pretty fundamentalist view. So mercy is, you ought to be punished, but God doesn't punish you, and in grace is, you don't really deserve it, but God gives it to you. Right? Now, I understand that worldview. I understand how that makes sense in the context of that worldview. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something different. We're talking about living by grace. I gave you the definition of grace in the context of what I grew up with, was like it was totally unexpected, and again, totally undeserved or unearned or without merit. Right? So merit is you earn it. Like you get your merit badge in the Scouts. You've done something to earn it. But grace is not something that you can earn. It is not a transaction, a transactional exchange with God. We can't say, well, if I go to church X number of days and I say this prayer Y number of times, then God will give me grace. It's not that kind of thing. There's nothing that we can do. There's nothing we can do to force the gift. And the reason for that is the gift has already been given. See, the gift has already been given. I'm trying to put it into a biological example, something that we can perhaps understand from the physical world. If it were not for the sunlight, life as we know it on this planet would not exist. The bodies that we have would not exist. The plants that we have would not exist. And if the plants did not exist, the oxygen that our bodies have evolved to breathe would not exist. There's nothing that you and I have to do to make ourselves worthy to receive the oxygen or the sunlight. There's nothing you or I could do to force the plants to give us the oxygen, or to force the sun to give us its energy. It's the very nature of the sun to give light. It's its very nature. We did not create that. We can't force it to happen. We can't make it happen. Sure, we can find ways to cooperate with it. We can put more windows in our house. We might be able to build a greenhouse out off the back where we can get flowers and plants to grow, and all those sorts of things. But we're not making it happen. We're not creating it. We're not using willpower to scrunch up our eyebrows and kind of force things to happen. So we could say that the air that we breathe exists by the grace of God. The sunlight that enables the life that we know it on this planet is an activity of the grace of God. So this idea then of grace that I want to move us to today, if we're not already there, is that living by grace and living in grace is when we are living in, as Dr. Holmes called it, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of God. The conscious realization of the experience of the presence of God. Now that's a very short sentence, but boy does it say a lot. So where is the presence of God? When is the presence of God? And how do we get the presence of God here? You know, that's kind of the human way of looking at it. But the presence of God is. It just is. The I am, the great I am. It just is. The highest name for God in ancient times was I am. When Moses, asked the burning bush, "Who shall I say sent me?" the response was, I am. I am that I am. I am. So God is. We don't create God, we don't compel God, we don't force God. God is. And then where is God? Well, omnipresence, all presence. Everything that is present is the presence of God. So the presence of God, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of God. The presence of God is already here. The gifts have already been given. Now we may be experiencing it to some degree of conscious awareness or not. Just like the activity of our lungs. Our lungs move of their own, it seems, of their own free will. Our bodies take in the oxygen and release the carbon dioxide. Without you and I trying to get our intellect in there and figuring out how to make it better, how to make it happen. It just is. It just is. And we are not aware of it. Most of the time we are not aware of it. If we have a breathing difficulty, of course we're aware of it. Because then every breath is in our consciousness. But we typically, excuse me, we typically have to take time to meditate, to bring our mind, our attention, our conscious realization to the fact that breathing is taking place. See, this is why the breath is used as meditation, because it's something that is constantly going on, has been going on since the day we were born, and yet we're usually not aware of it. So you might say that the presence and the activity of God is here and now in the function of breathing, in the function of breath. But we are not consciously realizing it. We are not consciously aware of it. So you can see then that one part of spiritual practice is to bring our attention to that which already is, but we have not been mindful of it. Now we can't do anything to compel the presence of God, because God is already present. Love is already present. Peace is already present. But we can prepare ourselves for that experience. We can't make it happen, but we can intend for it to happen. We can invite it to happen. We can do the things that we ought to do that kind of increase the likelihood of it happening. Excuse me. And the it that I'm talking about now is the conscious awareness of the experience of the presence of God. And that is grace. Experiencing the presence is grace. Practicing the presence is grace. And it's not a transaction. It's not something we can force to happen. It's only something we can be aware of the possibility, and we can do the things that spiritual teachers have told us to do to prepare ourselves for this possibility. And one of the key things that we can do is to be still and to know. Be still and to know. So in the human world, our mind is, or thoughts, whatever we want to call those, is constantly busy. Constantly. It seems from the minute we get up in the morning until we lose consciousness on the bed at night, our mind is going at 10,000 miles an hour, thinking about this, thinking about that, thinking about the other thing. And I think we become addicted to that activity. We become addicted to the drama of the activity, to the point where if everything was just absolutely wonderful and there was nothing to worry about, we'd worry about how long it was going to stay that way. You know, well, it's all okay today, but what about tomorrow? So the presence and the activity of God is already here. And we do not experience it because we are experiencing everything else instead. In the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, there's a line in there where Thomas says to Jesus, you keep, and I'm paraphrasing, you keep talking about the kingdom. Where is this kingdom? And Jesus said, it's already here. It's everywhere present. But men do not see it. To me, this kingdom is the experience of the presence and the activity of God. It is divine grace. And it is that experience that the mystics tell us about. It is that experience that is really the foundation of just about every religion that you can think of. All the religions are founded on somebody else's experience of the presence and the activity of God. But our spiritual growth is us preparing ourselves, intending ourselves, and inviting ourselves to receive. See, the gifts have been given, but they must be received. Divine love cannot force itself upon us. We must recognize that, and by that I mean the experience, the conscious awareness of the experience of the presence of God. And that is the ultimate. That is everything. That is, in fact, the only thing. The only thing. So as we go about our teaching, as we go about our spiritual development, as we go about our life, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that the presence, practicing the presence, is ultimately what it is about. And when we are in constant or near constant contact with that presence, we are living by grace. So we may think to ourselves, gee, I'm having this problem, whatever this problem might be, whether it be health, whether it be wealth, whether it be loving relationships, whether it be all of those things. We might think, well, I'm having this problem, And if I pray properly, this problem will be resolved. This problem will go away. And that's a true enough statement. But what is properly? What do we mean by properly? And as Dr. Holmes tells us, with all of our getting, we first must get God. We first must experience God. We first must experience the goodness and the love and the activity of God. See, what is it that produces change in human consciousness? It is the experience of the presence of God. And what is the way that we do that? Through our spiritual practice. So some teachers will say, well, prayer is the only thing that changes human consciousness. Some prayer does. Not all prayer does. Some prayer does. But when our prayer is for the purpose of recognizing the experience and the activity of God in our lives to a greater degree, in other words, our prayer is a recognition that the only reason this problem seems to exist is because somehow we have separated ourselves or allowed ourselves to be separated from the goodness that is already there. See, then our true prayer, our true purpose of our prayer or our treatment is to eliminate, to release, to let go of those apparent boundaries. The boundaries can't be real. God is all there is. And they can only exist in our consciousness. So what I'm doing is, instead of trying to bring the divine down to the human level so that I can have a better human experience, what we must do is rise in consciousness to the level where the problem isn't even real. It does not even exist. Now we are told over and over and over again that if we could live in grace, then the struggles would end, you see. So what we tend to do is pray to end the struggles. And what we need to do is pray to live in grace, to live by grace. Because by grace and in grace there are no struggles. Now Emma Curtis Hopkins in her book, I think it's Scientific Christian Mental Practice is the book. She says that the world is convinced that we need to have our resources come to us through our labor. Build factories, work hard, all those kind of things. She says, but the spiritual truth is that the resources come to us by the activity of God. And the day will come that we no longer think that we have to work hard in order to make our living. And she says, until that day comes, you must swing the hammer until God takes it from your hand. And what she's saying is you have to work right where you are. You can't just run out the door and say, oh, well, God is all there is, and I have everything I need. That's true enough. But you have to realize it. You have to realize you can't just know it. You can't just repeat it as an affirmation. You have to prepare yourself. Prepare yourself through your spiritual practice for the arrival or the realization, I should say. There's nothing to arrive, it's already here. But the realization of the grace that already exists. Take no thought of what you need tomorrow, for the Father in heaven knows what you need. Seek first the kingdom, the spiritual kingdom, and pray believing that you already have it, and you shall have it. In a nutshell. In a nutshell. So what I'm trying to get to today, or what I felt was trying to come out today, is this idea that we need to be willing. We've got to start with our willingness, right? Louise Hay said she used to ask her clients when they came in for treatment work, "Are you willing?" And sometimes they would quite frankly say, "I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing." And she would say, "Are you willing to become willing?" So we must start then with this willingness to live in grace, which I mean live in the conscious awareness of the presence and the activity of God in my life now. Are we willing to have that experience? And then are we willing to do the things that teachers over the years have told us help prepare us for that experience? The spiritual practice, the mental solitude. We don't have to live in a cave, but we do have to quiet the mind, still the mind. And so the East gives us the parable of the person who dropped a valuable jewel into a pond of water, and they stick their hand into the pond and they're moving their hand all around trying to get down to the bottom to see if they can find this jewel, and all they're doing is they're stirring up the mud and they're stirring up the ripples on the surface of the pond, and the sunlight is bouncing off the ripples so they can't see down through the water, and the water is all muddy. That's the activity of our minds. But if they just stop, if they just cease this meaningless activity, might feel good like you're doing something, but you're doing the wrong thing. Cease this meaningless activity, be still and know. The mud settles back to the bottom, the ripples calm on the surface of the pond, and then they can see clearly the gift that has already been given. Are we willing to take the time to find the practice that is right for us, and then do it, and then do it, and then engage in it? And are we willing to bring to our conscious awareness, first by a deliberate activity of reminding ourselves of the goodness of God all around us, and then through an inner realization, an aha experience of just knowing, just feeling that the presence is already here, and the presence is already with us. Our life is our practice. Our life is our practice. Every day, every moment of every day is an opportunity to remind ourselves that God is already here, God is already good. And if we are not experiencing this because we have diverted our attention someplace else. You and I can control that. We can control our attention as much as we at times think that we're helpless victims of the noise around us and all of those things. We can control it. We choose what we will give our attention to. At first it's difficult. It's difficult because our mind has been wandering like a stray dog and we have been following it most of our lives. And now it's time for us to tell the dog where to go, to lay down, to take a rest, to be still. Be still. Find the practice that works for you. Remember that which you are seeking is already here. The grace of God is already here. You could not take a breath if it were not. The fullness of God is already here. That which knows exactly what to do without us struggling to figure it out is already here. And what our intention is to realize that by experience, to have the experience. The next time you're faced with what seems to be an obstacle or a problem or a trouble or something that you want to get up your ego and get in there and wrestle with it, just ask yourself this one question. How would God see this problem? How would God see this problem? And I think what you realize is God wouldn't see the problem. No more than the sunlight can see the shadow. So if in the mind of God the problem does not exist, how real is it? The problem, just like the shadow is caused by the sunlight being blocked, the problem is caused by the activity in the presence of God being temporarily obstructed in our experience by an idea of separation. So every time we come across something that seems to be a problem, that is our opportunity to release and let go of whatever that particular idea of separation is, and recognize that God is all there is. Napoleon Hill said that desire is a starting point of all achievement. You have to want something. And he was speaking in both worlds when he said that. He was speaking primarily to the human world of business success. But he told people that his formula for business success only worked because there was a spiritual law behind it. Nevertheless, desire is the starting point of all achievement. What we desire more than anything, more than a pond, we would desire a pond if our hair was on fire, is we desire the realization of the presence and the activity of God here, now, in our lives. We recognize that the only reason that we are not experiencing it as much as we would like to is because of our erroneous thoughts, the blocks, the barriers, the boundaries in consciousness. And we simply move past them by stilling the mind, by being still, by knowing. By moving beyond them to the point where they're just noise in the background. And being at one, being at home, being in love. I invite you this week, take time, make time to just sit and be still. Find a practice that works for you. And remember, living by grace is the ultimate intention. And so it is.